How much does this mean World War III? Well, there is a small chance that things could go very wrong. Looking at this, from just a hard-headed, cold analytical point of view, looking at from the NATO side, there just seems to be virtually no benefit to this. There's virtually no upside, but there's a huge downside. It's first of all, the U.S. has so few ATACMS missiles to begin with. They supplied, I think maybe it was a couple hundred several months ago to the Ukrainians, but I believe they've used almost all of them up. We haven't heard anything about ATACMS missiles attacks in the last few months. We used to hear about them. Of course, there was that horrible incident on the Crimean beach during the summer. That was an ATACMS missile. And then, there were a few other attacks after that. Since I haven't heard anything in the last couple of months, and I think it's because for two reasons. Number one, there are very few missiles. Ukraine probably has just ATACMS missiles in the single digits. And the U.S. just about a month ago said that they really didn't have enough to send, of their own to send a significant number to Ukraine. So if in fact they send some, it's probably only going to be like 10 or 20 missiles. So we're talking about very small numbers. So there's first that. And then the second is that the Russians have gotten very good at neutralizing them. So very few ATACMS missiles over the last several months have actually gotten through and done real damage. That one that caused the carnage on the beach had probably been diverted, to be honest, by maybe Russian EW or maybe a Russian air defense missile. It was probably they had probably targeted an air base not too far from there. And it had been knocked off course by Russian air defense and ended up, killing the civilians on the beach. But that's typical. Usually these ATACMS don't get through. So we're talking about a few missiles, and it's also very unlikely, most of those missiles will be shot down or diverted by Russian air defense. So, but, maybe one or two, three will get through and could do some significant damage somewhere.
Right.
Now, so, and in fact, even the American and other Western officials have just frankly said, this is not going to have any effect on the outcome of the war, So what's going on? It just doesn't really make any sense. It's just like there's so little possible benefit. But there is a chance because, Putin and Lavrov and other high-ranking Russian officials have made it crystal clear, that if these ATACMS are fired, they know that they cannot be fired without direct participation of NATO military personnel. So in other words, it would be an attack by NATO on Russia, even if it doesn't do much. That's hugely significant. And the Russians clearly have drawn a red line in this and said there will be consequences. There were a lot of times when you say, the Russians were just bluffing. They had never said, they maybe protested, or advised against or whatever, but they had, with regard to other weapon systems, they had not threatened, dire consequences. They did not draw a red line. But in this case, they have. They really have. So it just seems very foolish. If, in fact, an ATACMS gets through and does some significant damage in Russian territory, the Russians will retaliate.
Right.
And then we could be off to the races.
Right. I don't think anybody in their right mind believes that lifting these restrictions is actually going to deal a devastating blow to Russia.
Right. Well, in fact, the only people that talk like that are like some crazies within Ukraine and then with the Baltic states. But even NATO officials and, Pentagon officials have said that outright. I mean, that's why the Pentagon back, a month or two ago was saying it has explained more than once. They're not going to benefit Ukraine. So we don't see the point in sending them. So, what's changed? Nothing's really changed. Not only, one thing they pointed out is that the Russians had already removed aircraft from that were close in air bases closer to the international border, the Ukrainian border. Moved them out of range of ATACMS. So there's just really not much to hit. There aren't really any high value targets. Now, the excuse that the Americans apparently gave, say, well, what's changed since then? Before you said that it just didn't make any sense. They said, well, they're North Koreans, and that's why we need to offer them, we need to respond. We need to lift the restrictions on these missiles.
Yeah, and of course, did they give any solid evidence of North Koreans entering the fight?
No. It's really funny. I've never seen anything like this. It just seems like the propaganda and the fake news stories have become more elaborate over time. And this one is just the most elaborate. It just goes on and on. I thought it might last a couple of weeks. It's gone on for well over a month, right? And it becomes, there are all kinds of there are plots and subplots. You could just put this together and make some sort of, fantasy novel out of it. They've talked about North Korean soldiers addicted to porn, North Korean soldiers getting drunk, our North Korean soldiers, they're just yesterday I saw that some analysts claimed that the North Korean soldiers, the ones that survive, because the Russians apparently are going to just use them as cannon fodder. And then the ones that survive will probably end up in the Russian gulag. I didn't know that Russia had a gulag, but apparently it does now. And they've also claimed that they've already fought, that a number have been killed, some have been captured, and it goes, there are all these kind of colorful details. You think that there's something to it, but there has not been just an iota of evidence that they are, in fact. And then when you stop and think about it, there is just, I cannot think of any reason why the Russians would put them there. The Russians have hundreds of thousands of their own soldiers in reserve. Why would they insert the North Koreans in there who cannot speak their language, who have not trained with Russians, for decades, not since the fall of the Soviet Union. The Chinese and the Russians, they every other month have some sort of joint exercise. They do it again and again and again because you need to do that. You have, if you're going to establish interoperability, it's something that takes years to establish and to maintain. The Russians do not have that with the Koreans. So it just does not make a bit of sense, nothing. And there's not a bit of evidence. But this is what they're using as an excuse for lifting the restrictions on the missiles. Now, the Americans have done something similar before. It was back in the 2000s. The George W. Bush administration sent missiles or installed missiles in Poland that clearly violated previous understandings with the Russians, in violation of previous treaties. I can't remember the exact treaty that it violated, but it was essentially torn up by this move. And then at the time, I remember reading this and just laughing out loud. They said that we've done this to defend Europe against Iranian missiles. It was just absurd, It's just, but that's the excuse they gave, and that was the official excuse for years and years and years until this year. It was actually officially admitted that it had nothing to do with Iran. It was all about Russia. So it's just this. It's just another absurd fig leaf. It's just an outright lie that's used to cover this ridiculous decision.
Well, the North Korean one, I think, is more entertaining than just the idea of Iranian missiles.
I agree.
Maybe
but you stop and think about it. Even the excuse, even if it were true, does not make a bit of sense. Because again, the issue, which they never really talk about in the Western media, but which the Russians have repeatedly emphasized, the problem is that it would require direct NATO involvement and would therefore be a NATO attack on Russia, right? So if you're going to actually be targeting concentrations of North Korean soldiers, so you might not just kill Russians, you might kill North Koreans. So it would be NATO attacking North Korean soldiers going to war against North Korea. So you, in fact, have escalated even more. You've escalated against two countries. NATO is now attacking not just Russia, but North Korea. So how does it make sense? It's just that the whole thing is just beyond absurd. It's just so stupid. Yeah. So the big question is why? Why have they done this? And the only thing that makes some kind of sense to me is that they're trying to stir things up before Trump takes office, maybe cause the situation to escalate so that it'll be harder for the Trump administration to extricate themselves from Ukraine. It's another effort to Trump-proof Ukraine. That's the term that has been used. I think that's probably what's going on.
Right. Just to emphasize how little impact this will have militarily, these ATACMS missiles, is if we just think about Ukraine has been firing ATACMS into Crimea, into the Donbass, for years. They've been trying to take out the Crimea bridge. That's something that they've been touting forever. And they fire ATACMS out at it all the time, or they used to until they ran out. But they never, they never took it down. We saw time and time again. They fire volleys, and Russia knocks down all these ATACMS. And you're talking about the world's largest country in the world.
Right.
That has perhaps the largest missile arsenal in the world, as well the most nuclear weapons in the world,
and the best air defense system in the world,
and the best air defense system in the world. And you look at Ukraine. Ukraine has virtually no air defense systems now. Russia's knocked them all out, and despite that, and Russia regularly hits Ukraine with missiles and drones, and they're still standing after over 2 years. And they're hitting them with hypersonic, high-powered missiles, hitting their energy infrastructure, which is badly crippled now, but they still have the lights on. And this is after years of hitting a country with much more advanced missiles, more powerful missiles, against a country that has no air defense systems whatsoever. And so you think that somehow giving them a handful of ATACMS and hitting the largest country in the world is going to change the outcome of this war? That's absurd. I don't think anybody in the right mind thinks that. Just a few people that haven't thought about this closely at all and just think that
unfortunately, which is the majority of Western politicians. But those that are well informed, the very small minority that are well informed they know that this will not make a difference. And the military, experts, they know that, and they've gone out and said it. They said it again. This will not make a difference.
Right?
So why? All you're doing is it's like it's a completely useless provocation. I mean, that's all it is. It has no military significance whatsoever, but it is an obvious provocation that Russia will have to respond to if, in fact, a missile does get through.